Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the Global Frailty Network Frailty Seminar Series. My name is Jorge G. Ruiz. I'm a geriatrician at Memorial Healthcare System in Hollywood, Florida, and faculty member, professor affiliate at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. I will be the moderator and I'll be introducing our speaker. But before I do that, we'll have the webinar Fading Appetite, Fading Function, Appetite Loss as a Clinical Marker of Loss of Function and Frailty by Dr. Philipe Barreto. I want to make sure that you know that you can use the WebEx chat button when asking questions to the speaker. And we'll have time at the end for questions, hopefully at least 10, 15 minutes where you can write your questions in the chat, and then we'll ask those to Dr. Barreto. So now let me introduce Dr. Barreto. Philipe de Soto Barreto is professor at the Université Paul Sabatier in Toulouse, France. He's the director of the Institute on Aging at the Gerontopole of the Toulouse University Hospital, a highly prestigious geriatric center of excellence, part of the World Health Organization Collaborating Center on Frailty, Clinical and Geroscience Research and Geriatric Training. He's member of the management board of the IHU Health Age, an institute dedicated to geroscience and healthy longevity. Dr. Barreto has a PhD in biocultural anthropology. His main field of expertise is on physical activity and exercise during aging, having participated in the elaboration of international guidelines, task forces, and consensus papers on this topic. He has led and participated in international task forces on topics related to frailty, intrinsic capacity, and geroscience. Philipe has contributed to several national and international research projects as PI investigator, principal investigator, local principal investigator, and co-investigator, including the INSPIRE platform on geroscience and the Institute IHU Health Age. Dr. Barreto has been invited as a speaker at national and international conferences and congresses and has published more than 250 peer-reviewed papers in prestigious journals, including JAMA Internal Medicine, British Medical Journal, Nature Aging, and Lancet Healthy Longevity. He currently serves as co-chief editor of the Journal of Nutrition, Health, and Aging. And relevant to this, the talk he's gonna give soon, he was the lead author of the ICFSR Task Force report on appetite loss and anorexia of aging in clinical care that was published in the Journal of Nutrition, Health, and Aging in 2022. So again, he's going to talk about fading appetite, fading function, appetite loss as a clinical marker of loss of function and frailty. Philipe?
So thank you, Jorge. First of all, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to contribute to this so important initiative on frailty domain. And thank you also for the introduction. So as Jorge said, I will today talk about appetite in the context of functional capacity of people during aging. And let's go. So you can see here my conflicts of interest related to this talk. Very briefly, a plan of the presentation today, so I will start with a very short background on appetite loss during aging. Then I will also briefly approach the ICOP care implementation in Toulouse, because I know you have already had several talks on that by Bruno Velas and also by Matteo Cesari. I will then talk about appetite loss with data that we have obtained here for a moment. Also the potential for appetite loss to have several different phenotypes. For example, I will get some examples of the interactions of appetite loss with malnutrition, depression, and frailty. Finally, I will briefly talk about our IHU Health Age Institute and appetite loss in the context of this institute, how we can take advantage of this new approach that's geroscience in the context of appetite loss, and then finally my conclusions. So, well, as Jorge said in the beginning, we have participated and elaborated 2 task forces on the topic of appetite loss in the context of the International Conference of Frailty Sarcopenia Research. The first one is the one that you can see displayed in the screen. It's published in 2022 in Journal of Frailty and Aging. And one of the main elements that everybody indeed knows is that the potential determinants of appetite loss can be very diversified. So we can think about physiological and functional determinants, and among these physiological determinants, we can, for example, cite body composition change, and it's perhaps one of the elements that links appetite loss to the biology of aging itself, with the reduction of muscle mass and then basal metabolic rate. We can all, of course, talk about so many different comorbidities that can lead to loss of appetite, including cancer, but not only, depression and so many other conditions, also medications that people take, but also psychosocial aspects. And in this context, loneliness, but also poverty can be very important. And other determinants, it's even cultural determinants can affect appetite during aging. So I think that this main observation is that this syndrome, this geriatric syndrome, is really of multidimensional etiology, which is perhaps one of the aspects that renders it difficult to investigate loss of appetite during aging. In this same paper that reports the task force that we have done, we also provided a few elements trying to contribute for research teams that would like to develop clinical trials on the context of appetite loss, to provide some cues of what we thought would be important to have in clinical trials on this topic. And you can see it's a bit small, but let me just show you some of the elements that we proposed in this task force. First of all, in terms of outcomes, primary outcomes should include weight and appetite. And also key secondary outcomes should perhaps include, for example, mobility. The population, although by definition, appetite loss has so many determinants, so we can imagine that there are so many different and heterogeneous phenotypes under the umbrella of appetite loss that it's impossible to investigate each of these phenotypes separately. But at that moment, we thought it was important at least to differentiate 2 types of population related to appetite loss: people with appetite loss with and without cachexia. And another element is the trial length. We propose length of at least 3 months for phase 2 trials and up to 12 months for phase 3 trials, in order to provide enough time for the intervention to be effective. And I personally like to think that this task force report was important somehow, because we know that recently we have had this publication in the New England Journal of Medicine, done by people from Pfizer team, that look at the effects of the growth differentiation factor 15 monoclonal antibody, GDF15 antibody, and all these elements: outcome, primary outcome, weight; secondary outcomes, appetite and mobility; population, people with cachexia, in this case, cancer cachexia, and the study length of 3 months, and this was a phase 2 trial. So I like to think that this discussion was important to help the field to move forward. And it's important to note that John Growak, that's the first author of the New England paper, was also present in the task force discussions. Yeah, so appetite loss is multifactorial. It's probably a prodromic state of malnutrition and can be associated to a myriad of clinical outcomes, as you can see here in this slide that was produced by one of my postdocs, Juan Luis Sanchez, that I take the opportunity to thank him for that. And in our second task force on appetite loss in the context of the ICFSR conference, we also tried to show how, despite the importance of this clinical syndrome, it's still an unmet clinical need because very often not assessed in clinical settings, at least in most cases, and really under-investigated in my personal opinion. And we tried at that moment to make the link with the clinical care. And I think it's a good opportunity that we have now with the integrated care for the people. That's the new healthcare pathway proposed by WHO. That's a function-centered healthcare pathway that has in its heart and recognize the importance of loss of appetite during the aging process. And I think this is a good moment to increase awareness around this so important topic. Yeah, so the implementation of ICOPE, integrated care for older people, care in Toulouse. So ICOPE, as I said before, it's a function-centered healthcare pathway developed by WHO that initially, when this handbook was published in 2019, was developed through 5 main steps that you can see here in the screen. It will probably change in the very near future, but this was how it was operationalized in the beginning. And you can see that we start with the healthcare pathway with the screening for potential impairments in intrinsic domains, and then go to the in-depth assessment. That's the step 2. And intrinsic capacity, as all of you know, is the combination of all the physical and mental capacities of an individual. And what's important also to mention in this context is that the way it's currently operationalized is through 6 main domains of intrinsic capacity that you can see here in the screen: the locomotor, psychology, cognitive, hearing, vision, and the one that's called vitality. And it is in this vitality domain that at the screening step 1 part that we have functional aspects that are screened here, appetite loss and weight loss. So ICOPE has been implemented in Toulouse officially since January 2020 in the southwestern area of France, as you can see here on the screen, highlighted in red. It's the region Occitanie where Toulouse is located. And since its implementation and given the success of the implementation, the French Ministry of Health decided 2 years after the implementation in Toulouse to start a kind of experience in several regions in France in which the Ministry of Health via the Social Security was reimbursing for the implementation of ICOPE in the real life of the different regions in France, which means that each each clinical activity done in the implementation of ICOPE is being reimbursed. So we can see here how it works, if people, healthcare professionals or older professionals are doing the screening. There is an amount of funding, and for all the steps of the healthcare pathway, um, there is a reimbursement in this experience. And how it works in Toulouse. So here you can see a very simple diagram. It starts with the screening for intrinsic capacity deficits that is done through digital tools. We have created in collaboration with WHO the ICOPE Monitor app for smartphones and for tablets, but also a conversational robot that can be accessed online. And people were requested to complete this assessment at least twice a year. So the idea is not just to get a snapshot of how is the prevalence of intrinsic capacity impairment in a given moment, but also follow people up over time. All the data that's collected by these tools goes directly to a secure database that is equipped with the algorithm of WHO to detect positive screenings in the different domains of intrinsic capacity. There is then a knowledge generation that the healthcare professional can see who are the patients that need further assessments in the context of the ICOPE healthcare pathway. Then the next steps are in place to be developed, the step 2 and 3 and so on. This is how the interface appears to the healthcare professional. So each healthcare professional has access only to his or her own patients. And once the data of the patient comes to the database, the healthcare professional can see through color codes which are the patients to prioritize. Once he or she click on the person, we have all the domains of intrinsic capacity and the response, all the assessments and the response of the patients for these domains. With data updated up to September this year, we have already trained more than 6,000 professionals to the use of ICOPE and the digital tools that we employ here in the Toulouse area. More than 6,000 individuals have been registered by in our data set in the ICOPE care program and have been assessed by care professionals. And even more than 10,000 people, more than 11,000 people have also performed self-assessment using our digital tools. And you can see here the prevalence of the positive screenings for the different domains of intrinsic capacity according to people being evaluated by care professionals or through self-assessment. Well, we can also use this data to look more in depth on how these phenotypes appears in our population. And I give here the occasion of this talk more information about the appetite aspect. Well, using the same database, but not, using the data that has been collected up to October 2023, it was the date of the last database abstraction that we get access, and focusing only on people 60 years and older and evaluated by healthcare professionals. So we had at that time more than 33,000 individuals with at least one step 1, that's the screening, and almost 10,000 people with at least 2 step 1 over time. Knowing that the first elements of this initiative has been published a couple of years ago in the Lancet Health Longevity. So here you can see the simple statistics about the population. The mean age 76, most of them women. And you can see the prevalence of the the different domains of intrinsic capacity. What interests us here is appetite loss with a prevalence of almost 15% of the population, knowing that this population is real life population looking for primary care services in France and community dwelling people. We can also look at how appetite loss overlap with the impairment in other domains. So we can see here the overlap between appetite loss and weight loss. Roughly talking, half of people with appetite loss also have weight loss. The same for locomotion. More than half of people with appetite loss also have an impairment on locomotion, knowing that we are talking about the screening aspect of ICOPE. So locomotion here is determined by the 5 repetition chair rise test. Also, more than 6% of people with appetite loss also have depressive symptoms, the psychological aspect. And the same, more than 6% people with appetite loss also have cognitive positive screening. Here you have the figures for hearing and vision too. We can also look at that how many of these different domains could overlap. And you can see, for example, that almost 5% of the population have all of appetite loss, weight loss, and locomotion impairment, which is not negligible fraction of the population. So here are a summary of these overlaps. And what's interesting for me, what was interesting to see is that the prevalence in the overlap of impairment in locomotion and impairment in psychology was higher in people with appetite loss compared to people with weight loss. So almost 6% of people with appetite loss have locomotion impairment, and almost 70% of people with appetite loss also have a psychology impairment. It's a huge amount. We have also used this data to, in a recent paper we have published in Nature Aging, in which we just look at the potential clusters of intrinsic capacity impairment using the screening data of ICOPE. We used here a data-driven approach through latent class analysis, and we found 4 main clusters that were created. We can see the low impairment class is composed by people with a low probability of impairment in all the domains of intrinsic capacity. And the other 3 clusters that you can see here, the most important is, of course, people with a higher probability of having impairment in all of intrinsic capacity also had worse scores for frailty, ADL, and IADL limitations. But what interests us is also the cluster that is composed by an important fraction of people with vitality impairment, knowing that vitality is composed by appetite loss and weight loss in this case. It's also the same cluster that is composed by psychology impairment, so depressive symptoms. And you can see that this cluster is also cross-sectionally associated to frailty severity, ADL limitation, and IADL limitation. More interestingly, perhaps, is that longitudinally talking, people belonging to this cluster at baseline have a higher probability to develop frailty in the future, so frailty incidence, knowing that the follow-up length was in average 6 months here. We can also try to disentangle the potential associations of appetite loss alone, weight loss alone, and their combination, and see how they associate with the other domains of intrinsic capacity. And that, what you can see here, you can see that appetite loss and weight loss, both of them are associated to all other domains of intrinsic capacity. All these analyses are being adjusted for age, sex, and weight. What's interesting to see is that the strength of the association seems to be stronger for appetite loss compared to weight loss for all these domains. And it's particularly important in the domain of psychology. So almost double of the probability of having depressive symptoms in people with appetite loss compared to weight loss here. And of course, when you have the combination of both conditions, appetite and weight loss, the probability of having impairment in the other domains is exponentiated, it's higher. Longitudinally talking, all of them, appetite loss, weight loss, and their combination, have been associated with the incidence of locomotion impairment, which means that we looked at people with no locomotion impairment at baseline, and those who developed the impairment at follow-up around 6 months after in average. And we could see that people with appetite loss at baseline had an increased probability of developing impairment in locomotion. But still more interesting is that appetite loss was the only predictor of the incidence of depressive symptoms in the future. Weight loss and even the combination of weight loss with appetite loss was not associated with the incidence of the psychology impairment in the future. So let's see how these different groups associated with the different functions, but using now the step 2, which means full-length scales and tests. So short physical performance battery for locomotion, mini-mental for cognition, PHQ-9 questionnaire for psychology, MNA for the vitality aspect. And you can see again that appetite loss without weight loss has been associated with most of these outcomes. That is just a trend for cognition, but for the other outcomes has been associated. The same thing for weight loss without appetite loss. But again, for most of these associations, the strength of the association seems to be more important for appetite compared to weight loss, except for the MNA in this case. And again, when you have both elements, both conditions, appetite loss and weight loss, the associations are still stronger. We have not found associations for longitudinal analysis here. Looking at how these groups associate with Frailty, the SARCF, IADL and ADL, again, appetite loss alone was associated with all of them. These associations were stronger than the ones obtained for weight loss, except for frailty, which is conceivable because since we are using the frailty phenotype here, weight loss is part of the frailty score. So, and when you have both appetite and weight loss, these associations are still stronger. And again, no association in the longitudinal approach. Oh, so this is interesting data, but as we have said in the beginning, appetite loss have several determinants and then several potential phenotypes. And we just tried to approach this for perhaps one of the first time looking at how these different phenotypes could be associated with function. And for example, we look at how appetite loss and frailty using the Frailty criteria would interact here. So you have a quite important prevalence of people that have both appetite loss and frailty, with more than 10% in our population with available data. And people with frailty is almost 1/3 in this population. And when we look how these groups associated with different clinical outcomes, we can see that people with appetite loss without frailty have an increased severity of frailty compared to people with no appetite loss and no frailty. Appetite loss alone was also associated to the SARCF, but was not associated in these analyses with IADL and ADL. But as you can see, frailty alone was associated to all the outcomes, SARCF, IADL, and ADL. And having both appetite loss and frailty was also associated to all the clinical outcomes. What's perhaps interesting to see also is that the strength of the associations are not so different between people with only frailty and people with frailty plus appetite loss, which seems to suggest that it's perhaps frailty that that's leading to these associations, or at least contributing the most to these associations. These results were quite consistent when we stratified the analysis for men and women. As you can see, appetite alone was associated with in both. For the SARCAF, appetite was only associated in men, not in women. But as you can see, frailty alone and frailty plus appetite loss remained strongly associated to SARCAF in both men and women. Similar findings for IADL, frailty alone and frailty plus appetite loss is associated to IADL in both men and women, and the same for activities of daily living, the basic activities, ADL. We also stratified the same analysis according to age and separate people that are young older adults, let's say people from 60 to 79, and older adults age 80 and plus. And you can see that appetite alone was associated with frailty severity in both age groups. But appetite alone was only associated with SARCAF in the youngest population, not in the oldest. But frailty alone and in combination with appetite loss remained associated, strongly associated with SARCAF in both age groups. Similar results for IADL and of course for ADL, showing the importance of frailty in contributing to these outcomes. Well, we have taken a look on the potential phenotype that appetite loss can create with frailty, but we can also think about appetite loss and malnutrition. And you can see that in our sample, this is not much prevalent phenotype. Only 3.5% of people have both appetite loss and malnutrition. And if you see this table, you can see that people with malnutrition were not very common in our data set. So only 6% of these individuals with available data had malnutrition. And when we look at the associations of the different groups, we can see that appetite loss alone, when compared to appetite loss when compared to people without appetite loss and without malnutrition, appetite loss alone was associated to all of frailty severity, SARCAF, IADL, and ADL limitations. But malnutrition alone was also associated in a stronger manner, and people with both appetite loss and malnutrition also had increased worse scores for all these outcomes. The results of the malnutrition appetite loss phenotype were very consistent across sex, men and women, but also across to the different age groups that I presented before. And we also look at the potential phenotype that appetite loss can make with people with potential depression. So here it's not clinical diagnosis of depression, but the cutoff often use it to indicate that people have a potentially depression. And you can see that this phenotype is quite prevalent in our data set. Almost 15% of people have both appetite loss and depressive symptoms. And people with depressive symptoms, important depressive symptoms since more than 5 in the PHQ-9 scale, we have almost 60% of the population that have depressive symptoms. Looking at how the groups associate with the different clinical outcomes, again, you can see that appetite loss alone compared to people without appetite loss and without depression was associated only with frailty, severity, but not with SARC-FI-ADL and ADLs here. But depression was associated with all these outcomes. And of course, the combination of appetite loss plus depression was more strongly associated to all the outcomes. So after looking at all this data, okay, we know that appetite loss is really a clinical issue for which we don't have any drug indication for the moment. But what about the biological aspects of appetite during aging? In this context, I think there is a new perspective that can be opened to the field of geroscience. And it's in this context that we have created and launched recently, earlier this year in April, our IHU Health Aging Institute. That is an institute dedicated to investigate how the biology of aging can contribute to healthy aging. So in other words, integrate geroscience in the healthy aging agenda to see behind the intrinsic capacity domains, which is the biological background of declining function. And we have, of course, intrinsic capacity and the ICO program in the heart of this institute. As all of you know, geroscience is a new field of investigation that is very, very young, I think 10 or 11 years, the first publication on this topic made by one of our colleagues, Philipe Sierra, who worked with us here in Toulouse for a few years. And the geroscience field was created under two main observations. The first observation is that aging is the major risk factor for most of the chronic diseases and loss of function and geriatric syndromes. Of course, we always knew about that. It's not new. The new thing is that the second observation is that aging in terms of biology can be manipulated. And this gives place to the main hypothesis in geroscience, that is, by manipulating biological aging, the onset of chronic conditions can be prevented or delayed, and even the severity can be reduced. In this context of geroscience and in our institute here in Toulouse, we also started a research platform that's called the Inspire Research Platform, that's composed by investigations in humans, in mice, and also in fish, killifish. And the idea is that we can have cross-species comparisons in terms of not only biology, but also in terms of function. So we are working hard to have functional outcomes that can mirror the human outcomes in mice and killifish, for example, all the domains of intrinsic capacity, how we can measure all these domains in the mice and the fish, since we have already well-established tests for humans. And this program has started in 2019. We have more than 1,100 humans already making part of the program, more than 1,500 mice that participated in, let's say, in the cross-sectional cohort, so a huge cross-sectional cohort of mice, and also the colony of killifish. And only for humans, we estimate that by the end of the 10 to 12 years follow-up, because this is ongoing study, we will get more than 600,000 biosamples, which is a huge amount. So here we have biofluids, but not only, we also have available cells, PBMCs in blood, but also in a fraction of participants, we have skin biopsies. And it's interesting because we are working hard to make all this data also available to the research community. So we are working in the data sharing process. It's not yet established, but this will come. And the idea is that in the humans, at least for the moment, we can evaluate, you can assess elements of each of the hallmarks of aging, the main biological drivers of aging, in the sample. So we have for the moment already assessed the inflammatory aging clock developed in the Buck Institute for the whole population. We have the epigenetic clocks available in the literature already done in the whole population through DNA methylation. So we have the first and second generation clocks, and we have even created a new clock that was trained on intrinsic capacity. And this publication has already been published as a preprint, and it's currently being evaluated in Nature Aging. We have also investigated the bioenergetics of the mitochondria in a fraction of participants using cutting-edge technology that's the single cell approach using PBMCs. And in the very near future, we plan to have evaluation of the SASP phenotype for cell senescence, so the pro-inflammatory phenotype commonly found through cell senescence. These biological markers of aging will also be done in the whole population alongside biomarkers of organs health. So we have, for example, for the brain, the assessment of the phospho-tau or neurofilament light chain, GFAP. This will be done. It's not yet done, but will be done in the whole sample in the very next near future. We will have the same for older organs. So in this context, and looking again at appetite loss, the idea is of our current work we are developing here in Toulouse is to look at how these markers of biological aging would associate with appetite loss. So the epigenetic clocks, the inflammatory clock, and mitochondrial bioenergetics. And in the future, perhaps look at how the biology of appetite loss interacts with the biology of aging. For the moment, we don't have the biology of appetite loss, but we have some literature saying that some of the biomarkers of appetite loss, such as leptin and of course GDF15, changes during aging. It's not the case for all the biomarkers of appetite loss. Ghrelin doesn't seem to change over the ages, but leptin and GDF15 and other markers seems to change. And the GDF15 is quite interesting because I think this recent publication that I presented in the very beginning of the talk, to some extent, is validating this perspective, this gerosine perspective, because GDF15 is a well-known marker of many biological cascades during aging. We can cite, of course, all the cascades that are inflammation related, so chronic inflammation, cell senescence, and SASP, but not only. So GDF15 seems to be a marker of mitochondrial stress response that is associated with many cascades leading to biological aging. And in this publication, they used 3 different doses of the monoclonal antibody of GDF15 that binds to GDF15 in blood and impeding that the GDF15 goes to the receptor GFRAL in the brain. And using these 3 different doses, as you can see in the main results, they found that people with cancer cachexia that were taking any of the doses increased weight over 12 weeks, over 3 months, whereas placebo is reducing weight. And it seems to have kind of dose response association with the doses. In people receiving the highest dose of the product, they found very consistent results in subgroup analysis that have been pre-planned regarding the main findings. So seems to be robust findings. And what's interesting to us here is that GDF15, this product was also associated with improvements in appetite and physical that can be seen also as a kind of marker of spontaneous mobility. So a single product, a single drug that is improving different conditions. So it seems to have a great potential in terms of geroscience perspective. So just to finish, appetite loss associated to all the older domains of IC, as we have found and I have shown here in my slides, locomotion, psychology, cognition, especially. Appetite loss predicts the incidence of positive screening in both locomotion and psychology. It associates and interacts with frailty, but also with other clinical conditions. And these different phenotypes can be created with, for example, appetite loss with or without weight loss, with or without malnutrition, with or without depressive symptoms and frailty. All these different phenotypes were associated to major clinical outcomes that I have shown you during this presentation. What we don't know exactly yet is how different are these phenotypes. The thing that they are not overlapping in terms of the patients that make parts of the different phenotypes suggests that these are to some extent different phenotypes, but we have not much information on that for the moment. What we don't know and it should be investigated is how the biology of appetite interacts with the biology of aging, if it interacts or not, because this could also open new avenues for treating this clinical condition. So finally, appetite loss is potential early marker of declines in function. The extent to which it may also be a marker of accelerated biological aging is currently being investigated, and I expect to be able to provide some findings soon. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and again, thank you for the invitation to be here and to have the opportunity to present these slides. Thank you.
But I think we have few questions here from the audience. One of them was from Dr. Supamutarian. He thanks for an amazing talk. Dr. Philipe, can you please share the real-life intrinsic capacity screening data from the ICOP Care Program paper with us? I guess you can, we'll have to try to find the link. So then I know it's open publication. There's another question. Which outcome measure do you use for the Frailty score? Also, shed some light on a few other outcomes which can be used for frailty and whether they are valid or reliable. I guess it points to the issue of frailty and how, what outcomes you use for that.
Which outcomes are used for?
I say what the question is, which outcome measure do you use for frailty? I guess, what were the outcomes that you were looking at frailty? I think you look more at associations, but
yes, yeah, and the frailty was the outcome. So here, and appetite was the variable of interest. So
right.
in this presentation, this was the approach I took.
Right, and then you use the frailty phenotype.
The Frailty phenotype for personalized frailty.
Right,
yes.
Exactly. So I guess that's the answer for that. Maybe that's what the person asked. The other one was, what do you think of the SNAC to screen for appetite loss, the instrument? I didn't see that you mentioned that as part of your presentation.
Yeah, I have not mentioned, but we mentioned in one of our papers of the task force of the ICFSR. Well, there are many tools that have been already used for measuring appetite during aging. There is no gold standard, at least to my knowledge. What I like in the SNAC is that a good compromise in terms of feasibility. So we have started to implement the SNAC, which is composed by only 4 questions. in the INSPIRE dataset that I presented to you, but also in the ICOP Care. Some of the nurses that are doing this work in the daily life of the healthcare system here in France used the snack in an experience with more than 200 patients. And some of them decided to keep using the snack because they found this was clinically important for them to have this information. So, well, given the absence of golden standard in the field, I think the snack is a good compromise because it can give you a variable that is ordinal or discrete, and can also, and we also have cutoffs to establish people with loss of appetite and not loss of appetite.
Right, and that's a tool that I know is used by some groups in the United States, but it's not commonly used in clinical practice, where mainly, I think, from my experience and what I read in the literature, is mainly asking whether the patient has lack of appetite. It's a very common complaint among older adults, and like you pointed out, especially common in some groups like depression, of course, frailty, and other conditions. I guess, there's another question here. Alcohol can disrupt our appetite by affecting the way our body processes nutrients. How can changes in alcohol use or alcohol use disorders be studied in ICOP? I don't know if you have data on that, because I know that in France, of course, there's a lot. It's common to drink wine and other beverages. So.
Yes. Well, in ICOP Care is a real life implementation. So we are not asking this kind of question. People that are going through the healthcare pathway and go to the step 2, they have a more in-depth assessment. And in this occasion, we are looking at, the clinicians are looking at which are the potential causes of decline in intrinsic capacity domains. And I think perhaps in some circumstances, alcohol can make part of that, but we don't have this data to respond. And to be frank, I have never read a paper on that before.
Right. I think that'll be an interesting research question, because, like I said, the cultural aspects of alcohol use. What we know is alcohol, of course, is in a way is a nutrient. It has calories there. So many people may get out of it, but of course there are other complications associated with this use. There is another question. I believe this is the ICOP research. Oh, they are sending the link for, I guess, the link to the report. There are no other questions here. I guess, like I mentioned earlier, I was struck by the complexity of the concept when you look at all these associations with your ICOP data, and like I mentioned before, the multiple phenotypes. And that means the treatments may be different for each condition. Like, I guess clinicians will kind of already have an idea. But one issue that was also interesting to find out is that anorexia, even without weight loss, has consequences. And I guess my question will be, and I think you implied that in your last slide, that appetite loss without weight loss, because we know you have weight loss, yes, that may be the cause, right? And it's clear that maybe contribute to all the problems in locomotion and function, all that. But appetite loss without weight loss was still associated with poor outcomes. But is that more, like you said in your slide, that this appetite loss without weight loss seems to be more of a marker of decline rather than the cause of the problem, right? Is that how you conceptualize it?
Well, it's hard to say currently to clearly respond to this question. I imagine that appetite by itself is not the direct cause, but it could be mediated by different other causes like weight loss, like depression. But what's important is that this sign can perhaps be detected before these more overt clinical expressions appear.
Exactly. It may be an early marker, I may indicate, of course, because I just saw a patient, for example, that was complaining of weight loss, but her weight was stable. So I say, hey, we're not going to do anything right now. She has dementia and she's on multiple medications. And the issue is, it's a practical issue for clinicians, because I think many of us, if we see anorexia, yes, affects your quality of life, but if you're not losing weight, it may not be we may not need to be as aggressive about treating. Rather than you have weight loss, yes, maybe appetite stimulants, removing medications and all of that. So it has definitely practical implications. But what I saw is definitely it's associated. It may be an early marker of something else rather than a cause of a problem, right?
I think for the moment it's perhaps the most prudent cue, but I'm not sure it should not be associated directly with the outcomes. I think it's a matter for further investigation, and let's see what happens.
Right. I'm not sure if there are other questions. I don't see any. No. Yeah, I don't think we have any other questions. I think we finished just on time. And again, thank you, Philipe, for a great presentation and for answering some of these interesting questions. And we hope to see you again in a future webinar. And I want to also thank all the participants for joining us today for this webinar discussion, the presentation, and just to ask you to join us on Wednesday, January 8th, 2025, the next year. We have another webinar, and it will be delirium and frailty in older adults, a very common problem in the geriatric population. Professor Giuseppe Bellelli from Milan will be presenting on this important topic and the research he's doing in this area. He's published a lot on the issue of delirium in older adults. So you are welcome to join us January 8th at the same time for the next webinar. Again, thank you, Philippe, and thank you all for participating. Take care.